Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a time when a disagreement over a pig nearly plunged two major world powers, the United States and Great Britain, into a full blown war. Imagine, if you will, standing on a windswept, rain lashed island in the Pacific Northwest. The year is 1859. You can almost smell the salt in the air, feel the damp chill seeping into your clothes, and hear the distant, mournful cry of a seabird. It's a rugged, beautiful place, but tensions are as thick as the morning fog. You're probably thinking, a war over a pig's? Really? And yes, really. Honestly, with the way things escalated, you probably wouldn't have survived the sheer awkwardness of it all, let alone any actual cannon fire. It was a moment in history where stubbornness and national pride took center stage, all because of one unfortunate porcine trespasser. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now turn down your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself on San Juan Island, a roughly 55 square mile piece of land nestled in the strait between Vancouver Island and the North American mainland. It's a lush, green place, but it's also a bit disputed. You see, the 1846 Oregon Treaty, which was supposed to settle the border between American and British territory, was a masterpiece of vague cartography. It drew the line along the 49th parallel to the Pacific, then through the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver's island, and then southerly through the middle of the said channel and of Fuca's Straits to the Pacific Ocean. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. There isn't one channel. There are several, primarily the Haro Strait to the west of the San Juan Islands, and the Rosario Strait to the east. Naturally, the Americans claimed the border ran through the Haro Strait, giving them the San Juans. The British, just as naturally, insisted it was the Rosario Strait, meaning the islands were theirs. For years, this ambiguity simmered. Both nations had citizens on San Juan Island, coexisting in a slightly tense, slightly confused harmony. The Hudson's Bay Company, a powerful British trading entity, had established a sheep ranch called Bellevue Farm on the southern tip. American settlers, meanwhile, were trickling in, drawn by the fertile land and the promise of a new life, staking claims further north. You can almost feel the unspoken territorial lines, the polite nods that carry a weight of unspoken disagreement. The island itself is a patchwork of forests and prairies. You might see a deer darting into the woods, or an eagle circling overhead. The American settlers are a hardy bunch, mostly farmers. They're trying to carve out an existence, planting potatoes, raising a few animals. Lyman Cutler, an American, is one such farmer. He's out on a fine June morning, not too different from any other. The sun is probably just starting to burn off the coastal mist. He's checking his potato patch, a source of pride and, more importantly, sustenance. And that's when he sees it. A rather large, rather complacent-looking pig rooting around, happily munching on his prized tubers. This wasn't just any pig. It was a pig owned by Charles Griffin, an employee of the Hudson's Bay Company. Now this pig had a bit of a reputation. It was a known raider of gardens. Historians still debate whether this pig was particularly audacious, or if Cutler's potatoes were just exceptionally tempting. What isn't debated is Cutler's growing frustration. He'd reportedly shooed this pig away before, but this time, something snaps. Maybe it was the way the pig looked up, a potato still dangling from its snout, with an air of complete indifference. It's a small moment, the kind that usually passes without incident, but today, it's a spark. You can almost hear the thud of Cutler's heart as his anger rises. This pig, in its own small way, represents the larger territorial dispute, the feeling of encroachment. It's not just about potatoes anymore, is it? It's about whose land this really is. So there you are, an invisible observer, watching Lyman Cutler glare at this marauding pig. The air is still, save for the pig's contented snuffling. Cutler, by all accounts, a man not known for a long fuse, decides he's had enough. He grabs his rifle. Now, in your 21st century mind, this might seem like a bit of an overreaction. Pest control in the 1850s, especially on a frontier where your crops meant survival, was a slightly more direct affair. You can almost hear the click as he readies the weapon, a sharp, metallic sound that cuts through the quiet morning. He takes aim. The pig, blissfully unaware of its impending doom, continues its feast. Bang. The shot echoes across the fields, startling birds from the nearby trees. The pig, one moment a picture of porcine contentment, is now very, very still. Lyman Cutler has just shot the Hudson's Bay Company's pig. The Great Pig War, though no one knows it yet, has its first, and thankfully only, casualty. You might be thinking, well, that escalated quickly. And you'd be right. It's a moment pregnant with unforeseen consequences, like accidentally hitting reply all on an email meant for one person, but with potentially international repercussions. Word of the pig's demise travels fast, as news, especially bad or unusual news, tends to do in small, isolated communities. Imagine the scene. Charles Griffin, the pig's owner and Hudson's Bay Company employee, discovers his prized animal. He's understandably upset. He confronts Cutler. Accounts differ on the exact nature of this initial confrontation. Some say it was heated, others that it was more of a stiff, formal complaint. Cutler, far from being apologetic, reportedly offers to pay for the pig. "It was eating my potatoes," he says, as if that settles the matter entirely. Griffin, however, isn't satisfied with Cutler's valuation of the pig, a mere $10. He demands $100. That's a hefty sum back then, roughly equivalent to a good few months' wages for some. It's the kind of price hike that makes modern airline baggage fees seem reasonable. Cutler predictably refuses. The pig was trespassing, he might have grumbled, and it wasn't that good a pig anyway. This is where the local authorities, such as they are, get involved, or rather, where the lack of clear authority becomes glaringly obvious. Cutler is an American citizen. Griffin is a British subject, working for a British company. The land? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or, in this case, the $90 pig discrepancy question. The British authorities at Fort Victoria, the main Hudson's Bay Company outpost on Vancouver Island, hear of the incident. They are not amused. To them, Cutler is an American squatter on British land who has destroyed British property and insulted a British subject. They threaten to arrest Cutler and transport him to Victoria for trial. This, for the American settlers, is a red line. The idea of an American citizen being arrested by British forces on land they consider American soil is simply unacceptable. One mainstream historical fact is that the Hudson's Bay Company had been exercising de facto authority over the islands for years, much to the chagrin of newly arriving American settlers who felt the Oregon Treaty should have immediately placed the islands under U.S. jurisdiction. The American settlers appealed to their own government. Brigadier General William S. Harney, the commander of the Department of Oregon, is a man known for his fiery temper and a distinct Anglophobia. A rather curious, somewhat weird detail is that Harney was already a controversial figure, known for his aggressive tactics in the Indian Wars and a generally pugnacious attitude. Some historians suggest he might have been looking for an excuse to assert American dominance in the region. Historians still debate whether Harney's subsequent actions were a calculated move to force a resolution to the border dispute or simply a knee-jerk reaction fueled by his personal biases. Regardless of his motivations, Harney sees the pig incident not as a minor dispute over livestock, but as a challenge to American sovereignty. He decides to send in the troops. You can almost picture him stroking his chin, a glint in his eye, thinking, an international incident over a pig? Perfect. It's the 19th century equivalent of a Twitter feud escalating into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. So, General Harney, with all the subtlety of a charging bison, decides military intervention is the appropriate response to a dead pig and a squabble over its cash value. He orders Captain George Pickett, yes, that George Pickett, later of Gettysburg fame, to take a company of the 9th U.S. Infantry, about 66 men, and sail from Fort Bellingham to San Juan Island. Their mission, to prevent the British from arresting any Americans and to assert U.S. sovereignty. You can imagine the scene as Pickett and his men land on San Juan Island on July 27, 1859, a little over a month after the fateful shot. The American settlers are likely overjoyed, feeling a surge of patriotic relief. The cavalry has arrived. They might have cheered, even though it was infantry. Pickett, a flamboyant character himself, sets up camp near the Hudson's Bay Company's sheep ranch, Bellevue Farm, effectively staring down the British. He issues a proclamation. The island is now under U.S. military protection. It's a bold move, a clear escalation. He's basically drawn a line in the sand, or rather in the lush green grass of San Juan. You can almost hear the collective gulp from the Hudson's Bay Company employees. Their quiet, disputed paradise is suddenly host to an American military detachment. This is no longer a simple bylaw infraction. It's a geopolitical chess move, and the pig was just an unwitting pawn. One wonders if Pickett, known for his rather dapper appearance, even on the frontier, made sure his uniform was perfectly pressed for the occasion. News of Pickett's landing and proclamation travels across the water to Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, with alarming speed. James Douglas, governor of the colony of Vancouver Island and also head of the Hudson's Bay Company in the region, talk about a conflict of interest, is incensed. He sees Pickett's actions as an outright invasion of British territory. Douglas was a formidable character, often described as the Old Doctor, known for his stern demeanor and unwavering commitment to British interests. He wasn't about to let this American military presence go unchallenged. Historians still debate whether Douglas's subsequent actions were driven more by his duty as governor or his interests as the head of the Hudson's Bay Company, whose operations were directly threatened by the American claim. What's clear is that he decides to meet force with force. He orders 3 British warships, including the powerful HMS Tribune, a 31-gun steam frigate, to sail to San Juan Island. Can you picture it? These aren't small gunboats. These are serious naval vessels, bristling with cannon, their decks swarming with Royal Marines. It's like bringing a sledgehammer to crack a nut, if the nut was already feeling particularly belligerent. The arrival of the British warships dramatically raises the stakes. Suddenly, Captain Pickett and his 60-odd men are facing down a naval force with enough firepower to blow their little encampment to smithereens. The British ships, commanded by Captain Geoffrey Hornby, anchor in Griffin Bay, their guns very pointedly aimed towards Pickett's position. You can imagine the tension ratcheting up several notches. The air is thick with it. The American soldiers, probably feeling a mix of bravado and trepidation, dig in, fortifying their position. Pickett, despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, refuses to back down. He reportedly tells Hornby that the Americans would make a Bunker Hill of it, a clear reference to the famous Battle of the American Revolution, implying they would fight to the last man. It's a classic bit of American pluck, or perhaps reckless bravado, depending on your perspective. A weird and somewhat amusing detail from this period is that despite the military posturing, the soldiers on both sides often fraternized. They were, after all, English-speaking people in a remote part of the world. There are accounts of them visiting each other's camps, sharing tobacco, and even celebrating holidays like the 4th of July together, albeit with a certain underlying tension. It's like being mortal enemies on the chessboard, but sharing a friendly beer after the game. This strange camaraderie, however, doesn't change the fact that their commanders are on a collision course, and the fate of San Juan Island, and potentially peace between two nations, hangs precariously in the balance, all thanks to a hungry pig and a farmer with a short temper. The stage is set for a potentially catastrophic escalation. So there you are, perched invisibly on a tall fir tree overlooking Griffin Bay. Below you, the scene is a curious mixture of military might and bucolic charm. Pickett's small band of American soldiers are busy digging entrenchments, their blue uniforms stark against the green fields. Out in the bay, the silhouettes of British warships loom large, their gun ports like dark, unblinking eyes. You can almost smell the wood smoke from the American campfires mingling with the salty sea air. The initial standoff is incredibly tense. Captain Hornby of the HMS Tribune has his orders from Governor Douglas, land Royal Marines, and dislodge Pickett's men, but in this is a crucial but, only if the Americans fire first. Douglas, despite his initial fury, isn't keen on starting a war either, not without explicit backing from London. Hornby, a seasoned naval officer, also recognizes the absurdity and potential disaster of the situation. He's faced with a junior American Army captain who seems determined to provoke a fight. Pickett, for his part, is equally constrained by his own orders, which are essentially to hold the island, but not to initiate hostilities. It's a classic military standoff, a game of chicken played with cannons and rifles. You can imagine the sweat beading on foreheads, the nervous glances exchanged between the young soldiers on both sides. Who would blink first? The mainstream historical fact here is that the British actually had significantly more firepower on site. The three warships, HMS Tribune, HMS Satellite, and HMS Plumper, collectively carried over 60 cannons and hundreds of Royal Marines. Pickett's company, even after being reinforced slightly, numbered less than 100 men, with only their rifles and a couple of small, largely ineffective howitzers they'd managed to drag ashore. If it came to a shooting match, the Americans were toast. Yet Pickett holds firm. He supposedly tells Hornby, "We will make a Bunker Hill of it," a phrase that resonates with American revolutionary bravado, even if the strategic situation is wildly different. It's the kind of statement that makes commanders on the other side roll their eyes and reach for the 19th century equivalent of an antacid. One particularly strange detail from this period of high tension is that, according to some accounts, when Captain Hornby suggested to Pickett that they might as well just divide the island between them until the diplomats sorted it out, Pickett allegedly replied that he couldn't do that because he didn't have a map big enough to draw a line on. Whether this was genuine naivety, sarcasm, or a stalling tactic is anyone's guess, but it certainly adds a layer of the surreal to the whole affair. Back in Washington, D.C. and London, news of the San Juan Tiff, as some newspapers were beginning to call it, is starting to arrive. Remember, this is 1859, no transatlantic cable yet. News travels by ship, taking weeks, sometimes months. So the initial reports are patchy, often sensationalized, and always delayed. President James Buchanan, already grappling with the increasingly fractured state of the Union that would soon lead to the Civil War, is not amused by General Harney's unilateral escalation. He's got bigger fish to fry than a disputed island and a deceased pig. Historians still debate whether Buchanan's relatively measured response was due to a genuine desire for peace or simply because his administration was overwhelmed with domestic crises. Regardless, he dispatches General Winfield Scott, the venerable commanding general of the U.S. Army, a hero of the Mexican-American War and a figure respected by both Americans and Britons, to investigate the situation and hopefully defuse it. Scott is an old hand at diplomacy and military matters, and the hope is that his gravitas can bring some sanity to the proceedings. You can picture the sigh of relief in the White House when Scott agrees to go. Sending Old Fuss and Feathers, as Scott was nicknamed, was like calling in the ultimate diplomatic troubleshooter. He was known for his meticulousness, and thankfully, a cooler head than Harney. While General Scott is making his way to the Pacific Northwest, a journey that, in 1859, is no small undertaking, involving a sea voyage to Panama, a trek across the isthmus, the Panama Canal is still decades away, and then another sea voyage up the Pacific coast. The situation on San Juan Island remains a curious blend of military posturing and bizarre normalcy. Imagine you're a seagull soaring overhead. You see the American camp, now slightly more dug in, and the British warships still anchored in the bay. But you also see soldiers from opposing sides occasionally rowing out to meet in the middle of the channel, not to exchange cannon fire, but to exchange newspapers, tobacco, or even fresh produce. There are stories of officers from both sides attending dinners hosted by the other, engaging in polite, if somewhat strained, conversation. It's a bit like a particularly tense family reunion where everyone is armed. One of the standing jokes that probably circulated in the camps was about whose turn it was to accidentally invite the other side over for tea, just to break the monotony of aiming cannons at each other. General Harney, back at his headquarters in Fort Vancouver, Washington Territory, not the Canadian one, is still fuming. He's not happy about the lack of outright aggression from his British counterparts, nor is he thrilled about the idea of his command decisions being reviewed by Winfield Scott. Harney is a man who believes in decisive action, and this diplomatic tiptoeing is clearly grating on his nerves. He continues to send reinforcements to Pickett, eventually bringing the American troop numbers on San Juan to over 450 men, commanded by Colonel Silas Casey. Pickett, a mere captain, is now outranked on the island, though his initial bravado set the tone. They even managed to emplace some heavier artillery. The British, not to be outdone, also increased their naval presence, with Rear Admiral R. Lambert Baines, commander of the British Pacific Squadron, eventually arriving on the scene. Baines, unlike the more bellicose Governor Douglas, is a pragmatic and experienced naval officer. He has orders from London that are far more cautious than Douglas's initial fiery instructions. The British government, much like the American one, has no real appetite for a war over a few rocky islands and a pig, especially with pressing matters elsewhere in the empire. A mainstream historical fact is that Admiral Baines famously countermanded Governor Douglas's order to land Marines and engage the Americans. He is quoted as saying he would not involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. This single decision by Baines is often credited with preventing actual bloodshed. It's a moment where a cool head in a position of authority makes all the difference. Had Baines been as hot-headed as Harney, or as initially provoked as Douglas, the pig war might have become a much more serious affair. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the diplomats if they'd known about it in real time. A rather peculiar detail is that during this standoff, American and British soldiers would sometimes hold joint sporting events like foot races or shooting competitions, with targets, thankfully, not each other. Imagine the scene: soldiers who are technically on the brink of war, cheering each other on during a sack race. It highlights the absurdity of the situation and the common humanity of the men involved. Historians still debate the extent to which the individual personalities of the commanders on the ground, Pickett's flamboyance, Harney's aggression, Hornby's caution, Baines's pragmatism, influenced the outcome. Could a different set of officers have led to a different, perhaps bloodier result? It's certainly a compelling thought. The waiting game continues. The soldiers build more robust fortifications. The American side even constructs a rather imposing earthwork redoubt, which they nickname Robert's Redoubt, after Henry Martin Robert, the engineering officer in charge, who, fun fact, would later go on to write Robert's Rules of Order. Perhaps the discipline of military engineering led to a desire for orderly meetings. The tension, while less acute than in those first few days, is still there, a constant hum beneath the surface of daily life on the island. Everyone is waiting for something to happen, for some word from the distant capitals that will resolve this strange, pig-initiated crisis. And that word is slowly making its way across the continent in the person of General Winfield Scott. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity for the soldiers on San Juan Island, General Winfield Scott arrives in the Pacific Northwest in October 1859. You can imagine the stir his arrival causes. Old Fuss and Feathers himself, a towering figure both literally and figuratively, stepping off the ship, probably looking a bit weary from the long journey, but every bit the commanding general. He's here to clean up the mess, to bring a much-needed dose of high-level diplomacy to a situation that has been largely managed, or mismanaged depending on your view, by local commanders. His reputation precedes him. This is a man who has negotiated treaties and won wars. If anyone can untangle this knot, it's him. You can almost feel the collective shoulders of the lower-ranking officers relax just a little. The grown-up has entered the room. Scott quickly assesses the situation. He confers with General Harney, and it's said that the meeting is rather frosty. Scott is not impressed by Harney's handling of the affair, particularly the decision to escalate so dramatically over such a minor incident. One of Scott's first actions is to effectively, though not officially, rebuke Harney by shifting focus away from military confrontation and towards a peaceful resolution. He then opens communications with Governor James Douglas of British Columbia. Douglas, who had initially been quite fiery, is also now more inclined towards a peaceful settlement, especially with Admiral Baines having refused to engage militarily and with the clear understanding that London does not want a war. It's amazing how the threat of actual cannonballs can cool even the hottest heads, especially when reinforcements aren't exactly clamoring to join your side of a porcine-induced conflict. The negotiations between Scott and Douglas are a delicate dance. Both men are patriots, determined to uphold the interests of their respective nations. Yet both are also pragmatic enough to see that a shooting war over San Juan Island would be an unmitigated disaster for everyone involved. A mainstream historical fact is that General Scott proposed a temporary solution, a joint military occupation of San Juan Island by a small equal number of British and American troops until the boundary dispute could be settled through diplomacy. This was a stroke of genius, or at least very sensible statesmanship. It allowed both sides to save face, maintain a presence on the island, and most importantly, avoid bloodshed. Douglas, after some consideration and likely consultation with his advisors and Admiral Baines, agrees to Scott's proposal. It's the kind of compromise that doesn't make anyone wildly happy, but everyone can live with it. Think of it as that moment in a group project where everyone finally agrees on a plan, not because it's perfect, but because it means the arguing can finally stop. A weird little tidbit from this period is that during the ensuing joint occupation, the American and British camps were established at opposite ends of the island. The Americans remained at their fortified position on the southern end, while the British established a camp for Royal Marines on the northern end, near present-day Roach Harbor. They were close enough to keep an eye on each other, but far enough apart to minimize daily friction. It was a symbolic sharing of the sandbox. Historians still debate the long-term psychological impact of this joint occupation on the settlers of both nationalities who continued to live on the island. Did it foster a unique sense of shared identity, or did it merely paper over the underlying tensions? What's certain is that it was a unique solution to a unique problem. The agreement stipulated that each nation would maintain no more than 100 men on the island. This dramatically reduced the military footprint and the risk of accidental escalation. General Harney was soon recalled from his command in the Department of Oregon, a clear sign of Washington's disapproval of his aggressive stance. Captain George Pickett, ironically, remained on San Juan for a while, his moment of Bunker Hill bravado having passed into the more routine garrison duty. Perhaps he spent his time perfecting his famous hairstyle. The immediate crisis was over. The cannons were silenced not by gunfire, but by diplomacy. The Pig War, as a potential shooting war, had ended before it truly began, thanks in large part to a pragmatic general and an admiral who refused to fight over a pig. And so, with General Scott's sensible compromise in place, San Juan Island enters a rather peculiar phase of its history, the era of joint military occupation. You're now observing a period that stretches for over a decade, from late 1859 all the way to 1872. Imagine the scene. Two flags flying on the same small island, the stars and stripes at the American camp in the south, and the Union Jack at the British Royal Marine Camp in the north. It's a bit like a very polite, very prolonged, and slightly awkward house share between two powerful landlords who haven't quite agreed on who owns the house, but have decided not to burn it down while they figure it out. The initial force of 100 men on each side is maintained, more or less, for the duration. These aren't frontline combat troops anymore, bristling for a fight. They are garrison soldiers, tasked with maintaining order, representing their nation's claim, and frankly, trying to alleviate the boredom of a remote posting. Life under the joint occupation settles into a surprisingly peaceful routine. The American camp, initially Pickett's rough and ready earthworks, evolves into a more permanent settlement. The British camp, often referred to as English camp, develops its own distinct character with neat barracks, officers' quarters, and even a formal garden. You can almost smell the pipe tobacco and hear the murmur of conversations in two distinct accents drifting on the island breeze. A mainstream historical fact is that this joint occupation, while unique, was remarkably successful in preventing further conflict. There were no major incidents of violence or aggression between the two military forces during these 12 years. The soldiers, initially wary, developed a kind of working relationship. They coexisted, sometimes even cooperated, on minor local matters. It's a testament to the discipline of the soldiers and the wisdom of the initial agreement. You might even say it was the 19th century equivalent of a successful de-escalation strategy, something modern diplomats could learn a thing or two from. See? We can share, the island seemed to whisper. One of the more curious and rather charming details of this period is the social interaction that inevitably occurred. Despite official separation, soldiers and officers from both camps would occasionally meet for social events. There are accounts of horse races, cricket matches, which the Americans probably found baffling, and even joint celebrations for holidays like Christmas or Queen Victoria's birthday. Imagine a British Marine trying to explain the rules of cricket to a bewildered American infantryman, or an American officer attempting to host a Thanksgiving dinner for his British counterparts, complete with bewildered comments about the stuffing. It's the human element triumphing over political division. Of course, there was still the underlying reality of the unresolved dispute. Historians still debate how much genuine friendship developed versus a more pragmatic, keep your potential enemies closer kind of interaction. Was it true camaraderie, or just a way to pass the lonely hours on a remote island, far from home? Perhaps it was a bit of both. The soldiers weren't making policy, they were just living it day by day. They knew their respective governments, thousands of miles away, were the ones who would ultimately decide their fate and the islands. This period was essentially a long, slow drum roll, waiting for the diplomatic crescendo. While the soldiers on San Juan Island are busy trying to outbore each other, or perhaps engaging in another friendly or not so friendly cricket match, the wheels of international diplomacy are turning, albeit incredibly slowly. You have to remember, this is the mid to late 19th century. Negotiations aren't happening over Zoom calls or instant messages. They involve lengthy sea voyages, formal diplomatic notes written in elaborate script, and a great deal of patience. The United States is soon consumed by its own internal conflict, the American Civil War, which understandably pushes the San Juan boundary dispute far down the list of national priorities. For a while, it seems like the joint occupation might just become a permanent fixture, a quirky footnote in the history of Anglo-American relations. You can imagine the soldiers on the island hearing news of the great battles back east, feeling even more isolated and perhaps a little forgotten. Their daily routine of drills, patrols, and maintaining their respective camps must have seemed a world away from the epic struggles reshaping their nation. However, once the Civil War concludes and the United States begins its period of reconstruction, attention eventually circles back to unresolved international issues. Both Britain and the U.S., weary of conflict and looking to solidify more stable relations, finally agree in the Treaty of Washington in 1871 to resolve the San Juan boundary dispute through binding arbitration. This is a significant step. Instead of threatening each other with warships, they're agreeing to let a neutral third party decide. A mainstream historical fact is that the agreed-upon arbitrator was Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. It might seem a bit random now, picking the German emperor to settle a border dispute between America and Britain in the Pacific Northwest. But Germany was seen as a rising, relatively neutral power at the time, and the Kaiser was considered a respectable figure for such a task. It's like asking your most impartial, level-headed friend to settle an argument between you and your sibling over who gets the last piece of cake, only with much higher stakes and more elaborate uniforms. A three-man commission was appointed by the Kaiser to study the arguments and the notoriously ambiguous wording of that original 1846 treaty. Each side presented its case, arguing for either the Haro Strait, the American claim, or the Rosario Strait, the British claim, as the rightful channel for the boundary. You can picture the German arbitrators poring over maps, historical documents, and legal arguments, probably wondering how such a beautiful chain of islands became the subject of so much fuss. One rather interesting, though perhaps not widely known detail, is the sheer volume of paperwork and cartographic evidence presented by both sides. Lawyers and diplomats on both sides had been preparing their arguments for years, and the German commission was inundated with documents. They probably needed a very large table. Historians still debate the finer points of the legal arguments and whether one side had a definitively stronger case based purely on the treaty's text, or if the final decision was influenced by broader geopolitical considerations of the time. Finally, On October 21st, 1872, Kaiser Wilhelm I announced his decision. Drumroll, please. He ruled in favor of the United States, determining that the boundary line should run through the Haro Strait. This meant that the San Juan Islands, including the eponymous San Juan Island, where all the fuss began, were officially American territory. You can imagine the quiet satisfaction in Washington, D.C., and the polite, if perhaps somewhat disappointed, acceptance in London. For the American settlers on the island, it's a moment of triumph and vindication. For the Hudson's Bay Company, it marks the end of their operations on San Juan. The British Royal Marines stationed at English Camp receive their orders, pack up, and withdraw. On November 25th, 1872, the Union Jack is formally lowered at English Camp, and the last British forces depart, ending the 12-year joint occupation. The American troops fire a respectful salute as the British ships sail away. The Pig War, which had started with a bang, literally the shooting of the pig, ends not with further conflict, but with a diplomatic resolution and a peaceful withdrawal. The only casualty remained that one unfortunate potato-loving pig. The whole affair serves as a rather absurd but ultimately heartening example of how two nations, even when teetering on the brink, can find a way to step back and resolve their differences without resorting to widespread violence. The war, where the only shot fired was against a pig, had officially and rather anticlimactically concluded. Now, as the last images of the departing British ships fade and the American flag flies undisputed over San Juan Island, let the calm of that resolution settle over you. The tension that once gripped this small piece of land has long since dissipated, leaving behind only a fascinating story and a beautiful landscape. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore of San Juan Island continues, a timeless rhythm undisturbed by the distant echoes of political squabbles. Feel the cool, crisp air of the Pacific Northwest, carrying the scent of pine and salt, a cleansing breath after all that historical excitement. The soldiers have all gone home, their camps now quiet, slowly being reclaimed by nature or preserved as historical sites. The sheep of Bellevue Farm graze peacefully, no longer a point of international contention. Even the ghosts of the potatoes, so rudely consumed, have long since returned to the earth. Allow your mind to drift, to float on these calm waters. The urgency of the past fades into a soft, gentle murmur. The complexities of treaties and territorial claims dissolve into the simple beauty of the islands, green jewels set in a sapphire sea. There are no more cannons, no more ultimatums, just the peaceful rotation of the earth and the steady passage of time. Let the quiet of this resolution, this peaceful end to a peculiar conflict, be a balm to your mind. Every breath you take is a little deeper, a little slower. The story has been told, the history laid to rest for the night. All that remains is the tranquility of this moment, here and now. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back, way back, to a time of emperors, massive undertakings, and an army that waited in silence for over 2 millennia. Imagine, if you will, standing in a vast excavated pit. Before you, rank upon rank of life-sized warriors, sculpted from terracotta, stand in silent, eternal formation. Each face is unique, each expression frozen in a moment from over 2,000 years ago. They were created to guard an emperor in the afterlife, a testament to a power and vision almost too vast to comprehend. You're looking at the terracotta army, a silent sentinel in the earth. It's a scene of breathtaking scale, a ghostly echo of a world so different from our own, yet so vividly preserved. To put it mildly, the health and safety regulations during its construction were probably, let's just say you wouldn't want to be the guy who dropped a statue's head. You probably wouldn't have survived the ensuing imperial tantrum. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now turn off the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself not in a museum, not looking at exhibits behind glass, but somewhere else. It's March 1974, and the air in Lintong County, Shanxi Province, China, is dry. Spring is just beginning to breathe warmth into the land, but the chill of a long winter still clings to the earth. You are with a group of local farmers, their faces etched with the hard work of coaxing life from the lowest soil. Their names are Yang Jifa, his 5 brothers, and their neighbor Wang Puji. They're not looking for history, they're looking for water. A persistent drought has gripped the region, and their crops, their very livelihoods, are at stake. They've decided to dig a well, a gamble, a hope against the parched earth. The shovels bite into the dry soil again and again. The work is strenuous, the sun surprisingly warm for early spring. Sweat stings your eyes, or perhaps it's their sweat you feel, the collective effort of men desperate for relief. Hours pass, the hole deepens, 1 meter, 2 meters, then 3. Suddenly, one of the shovels strikes something hard, something that isn't rock. There's a dull thud, a sound that makes them pause. Curiosity, mixed with a little apprehension, flickers across their faces. They dig more carefully now, scraping away the soil. What emerges first is a patch of reddish-brown baked earth, clearly worked by human hands. Then, a shoulder, unmistakably sculpted, and then a head. Not a skull, but a life-sized pottery head of a warrior. Its features stoic, its gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point. Imagine their surprise, their confusion. They were looking for the stuff of life, water, and instead, they've unearthed a silent guardian from a forgotten age. This wasn't just an old pot. This was something else entirely. Initially, they probably thought they'd stumbled upon an old kiln site, or perhaps a traditional tomb, common enough in this historically rich part of China. Some accounts say they even reburied parts of it, a little spooked. The local villagers, steeped in folklore, might have whispered about disturbing spirits, or perhaps an ancient curse. It's a classic example of how the mundane search for survival can accidentally peel back the layers of time to reveal something truly extraordinary. One of the first mainstream historical facts that would soon come to light is that these weren't just random statues. They were part of the massive necropolis of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, who unified the warring states in 221 BC. He was a figure of immense power and ambition, and this underground army was meant to accompany him into the afterlife, to serve and protect him for eternity. The initial discovery was just the tip of the iceberg. A single loose thread that once pulled would begin to unravel one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century. The farmers reported their find to the local authorities, perhaps with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. It's said that at first, the local cultural officials weren't entirely sure what to make of it. Was it an important find or just some local oddity? One weird detail that often gets mentioned is how some of the terracotta fragments were initially taken home by the villagers. Some kids were reportedly playing with a terracotta head as a toy, completely unaware of its immense historical value. Can you imagine that? A priceless artifact being used for a game of catch. It's a humorous image, but also a reminder of how easily history can be lost or overlooked. Archaeologists soon arrived on the scene, and the true scale and significance of the find began to dawn on them. The initial test digs revealed not just one warrior, but hundreds, then thousands, all arranged in battle formation in vast underground pits. It was an army frozen in time, a silent legion waiting for a call that would never come. The sheer ambition of it is staggering. The level of detail, the individuality of each soldier, the realism of their armor and weapons, it all pointed to an unprecedented imperial project. Historians still debate the exact number of artisans and laborers involved in the creation of the terracotta army and the mausoleum complex. Estimates range from tens of thousands to over 700,000 individuals, many of whom were likely conscripts or convicts. Imagine the sheer human effort, the sweat, the toil, the lives poured into this monumental undertaking, all for one man's journey into the unknown. You can almost hear the distant echoes of their chisels, the murmur of their voices, the creak of carts hauling clay, all buried beneath the silence of centuries. The news of the discovery begins to spread, first locally, then nationally, and finally, it explodes onto the world stage. You can picture the archaeologists, initially cautious, their professional skepticism slowly giving way to unadulterated awe as the earth yields more and more of its ancient secrets. Each day brings new revelations, another row of soldiers, a broken chariot, a collection of bronze weapons still sharp enough, it's said, to split a hair even after 2 millennia underground. That last part is a bit of an exaggeration, of course, but the preservation is remarkable. Think about that for a moment. While empires rose and fell above ground, these soldiers kept their silent vigil, their painted colors fading, their clay bodies sometimes succumbing to the pressure of the earth, but their formation largely intact. It's like stumbling upon a perfectly preserved moment, a snapshot of a military force ready for inspection. One can only imagine the hushed excitement in those early days of excavation, the gentle brushing away of soil, the collective gasp as another perfectly rendered face emerged from the dirt. It must have felt like being the first to open a pharaoh's tomb, but on an even grander, more militaristic scale. The man behind this subterranean legion, Qin Shi Huang, wasn't exactly known for his subtlety or his small-scale projects. This is the emperor who not only unified China, ending centuries of conflict during the Warring States period, but also initiated the construction of the first version of the Great Wall, standardized weights, measures, currency, and even the width of chariot axles to facilitate transport across his new empire. That axle standardization might sound like a minor bureaucratic detail, but imagine trying to drive your cart through different states where the ruts in the road are all different widths. It would be like trying to use a Betamax tape in a VHS player, utterly frustrating and a sure way to slow down commerce and control. So a pretty smart, if slightly obsessive move. His drive for uniformity and control was legendary, and the Terracotta Army is perhaps the ultimate expression of that. He wasn't just planning for his death, he was planning to rule in the afterlife, just as he had in life, and he clearly intended to have the best equipped, most intimidating spectral army on the block. One of the mainstream historical facts here is the sheer logistical challenge of creating such an army. We're talking about an estimated 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots with 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, the majority of which are still buried in the pits near Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. Each soldier was individually crafted with unique facial features, hairstyles, and expressions, while the bodies and limbs were mass-produced using molds. The heads and finer details were individualized by skilled artisans. It was an assembly line of artistic creation, but with a level of personalization that is simply mind-boggling for the time. Imagine the workshops, the smell of damp clay, the heat of the kilns firing day and night, the foreman barking orders, and the artisans, each a specialist in ears or noses, or perhaps the intricate knot of a warrior's top knot. It's a level of organization that speaks volumes about the administrative power of the Qin state. They weren't just good at conquering, they were masters of project management. You almost expect to find a clay clipboard somewhere with a project timeline etched into it. Now, for a weird detail that often gets overlooked, it's believed that the artisans who worked on the Terracotta Army were required to inscribe their names or workshop marks onto their creations. This wasn't for artistic recognition in the way we might think of it today, like a signature on a painting. Instead, it was a quality control measure. If a statue was found to be defective, the responsible artisan or workshop could be traced and presumably punished. Talk about pressure. It's one thing to mess up a pot that's going to hold someone's lunch. It's quite another to know that a flaw in your work for the Emperor's eternal guard might lead to some very unpleasant consequences in the mortal realm. It certainly puts a new spin on the term deadline. The level of accountability was intense. Some scholars suggest that the punishments for shoddy work could have been severe, adding a rather grim undercurrent to the creation of these magnificent figures. The discovery also reignited many scholarly debates, one of the most prominent being the precise nature and purpose of the army. While the consensus is that it was created to protect the emperor in the afterlife, the specifics are still discussed. Were they meant to be a literal fighting force against spiritual enemies, or were they more symbolic, representing the emperor's power and the extent of his domain? Some historians still debate whether the pits were ever truly finished according to Qin Shi Huang's original grand design before his sudden death. There are signs of haste in some areas, and the sheer scale of the unexcavated portions of the mausoleum complex suggests that what we see is only a fraction of what was planned or even completed. The main tomb of Qin Shi Huang himself, a massive man-made mound nearby, remains unexcavated, partly due to concerns about preserving its contents, and partly because of accounts written by the Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian, who described a subterranean palace complete with rivers of mercury and traps for intruders. No one is quite ready to reenact an Indiana Jones scene with actual rivers of flowing mercury. Thank you very much. The thought of what might still lie hidden, undisturbed for over 2 millennia, continues to fuel speculation and research. You are essentially standing on the edge of an enormous, unsolved historical puzzle, and the pieces are made of earth, clay, and the ambitions of a man who would be king, even in death. As you continue to survey this subterranean marvel, the sheer audacity of Qin Shi Huang's vision really begins to sink in. This wasn't just an army, it was a statement of power, of control, and of an ego so vast it sought to command the afterlife itself. Imagine the resources diverted to this project. While peasants toiled in the fields and soldiers guarded the frontiers of a newly unified and often restless empire, a significant portion of the state's wealth and manpower was being funneled underground here into this silent clay legion. It makes you wonder about the conversations in the imperial court. Were there ministers who dared to suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, spending a fortune on an underground army of pottery men while there were still, living people to feed and manage might be a bit excessive? Probably not. Voicing dissent against Qin Shi Huang was generally a career-limiting move, often with a very literal termination. He wasn't a suggestion box kind of emperor. The creation of the Terracotta Army also offers a fascinating glimpse into the technological and artistic capabilities of the Qin dynasty. One mainstream historical fact that astounds visitors and scholars alike is the advanced metallurgy evident in the bronze weapons carried by the warriors. Many of the swords, arrowheads, and crossbow triggers were coated with a thin layer of chromium oxide. This chromium plating, an advanced anti-rust technique, was believed to be a 20th century invention until it was found on these 2,200-year-old weapons. How Qin artisans stumbled upon or developed this technique remains a subject of study and amazement. It meant that many of the weapons were incredibly well preserved, emerging from the earth still sharp and gleaming, as if ready for battle. It's a little unnerving, actually, to think of these silent warriors, armed with weapons that have defied the ages better than many modern alloys. It's like they were really serious about this afterlife gig. Now for a slightly bizarre and somewhat macabre detail surrounding the construction of not just the army, but the entire mausoleum complex. Historical texts, particularly Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, suggest that to maintain the secrecy of the tomb's location and its intricate and booby-trapped contents, many of the craftsmen and laborers who worked on its innermost secrets were themselves entombed within it. After the emperor was interred and the treasures sealed, the passage gates were closed, trapping all those who knew too much. It's a chilling thought. The very hands that sculpted these lifelike warriors and built the emperor's eternal palace, possibly becoming its first unwilling guardians in death. While direct archaeological evidence for this specific event at the main tomb is still pending, as the tomb itself is unexcavated, the historical accounts paint a grim picture of the lengths to which the emperor or his immediate successors would go to protect his final resting place. It definitely adds another layer of solemnity to the site, doesn't it? You're not just looking at art, you're potentially looking at a monument built on countless untold sacrifices. One hopes They at least got overtime pay before the gates swung shut. Probably not. This brings us to another ongoing scholarly debate: the extent of foreign influence, if any, on the artistry of the terracotta army. The life-sized, realistic portrayal of the soldiers is quite distinct from earlier, more stylized Chinese art. Some scholars have proposed that Greek art and sculptors who arrived in Central Asia with Alexander the Great might have influenced Chinese artisans, leading to this sudden burst of realism. Traces of European DNA found in Xinjiang province along the Silk Road from around the same period have added fuel to this theory. The idea is that these Hellenistic artistic traditions could have traveled east, inspiring the incredible detail and individuality of the terracotta figures. Other scholars, however, maintain that the style is a purely indigenous development, a culmination of Chinese artistic traditions that simply reached a new peak under the first emperor's patronage. They argue that while there was certainly cross-cultural exchange, the direct influence of Greek sculptors on the terracotta army is speculative. It's a fascinating puzzle. Was this incredible artistic achievement a purely local phenomenon, or was it an early example of East-West artistic fusion? The silent warriors themselves offer no easy answers, their clay faces guarding this secret as steadfastly as they guarded their emperor. As you stand there, surrounded by their quiet ranks, you realize that their discovery didn't just unearth an army. It unearthed a host of new questions about a pivotal moment in human history, a moment when a unified China was just beginning to flex its muscles on the world stage, and an emperor was preparing to conquer even death itself. You're now beginning to grasp the what, this incredible army of clay. But to truly feel the weight of these silent sentinels, you need to delve into the why and the who. Why build such a thing? And who was this Qin Shi Huang, this man whose ambition reached so far beyond the mortal coil? Let's adjust our focus, moving from the dusty pits of discovery to the very heart of the Qin dynasty, a period of relentless drive and brutal efficiency. You are stepping into a world that is in many ways the crucible of modern China. The very name China is thought by some to derive from Qin, pronounced Chin. Think about that for a moment. The legacy of this dynasty, though short-lived, is woven into the fabric of the nation's identity. To understand the terracotta army, you have to understand the first emperor's obsession with immortality and his meticulous preparations for the afterlife. This wasn't a whimsical project. It was a deadly serious component of his quest to conquer death itself. Qin Shi Huang ascended the throne of the Qin state at the tender age of 13, around 246 BC. Even at that young age, or perhaps guided by his powerful regents, work on his mausoleum is said to have begun. Imagine being a teenager and already planning your eternal underground palace. Most kids are worried about acne or what's for dinner. Young Ying Zheng, his personal name, was apparently mapping out his subterranean empire. It gives planning for the future a whole new meaning. He was, by all accounts, a visionary, a ruthless leader, and a man driven by a profound fear of death, which paradoxically spurred some of the most monumental constructions in human history. One mainstream historical fact about his reign is, of course, the unification of China in 221 BC. After centuries of bloody conflict, known as the Warring States period, where various kingdoms fought for supremacy, Qin Shi Huang managed to conquer them all. He brought an end to the feudal system, centralized power, and established a vast unified empire. This unification wasn't achieved through gentle persuasion and peace treaties, mind you. It was a campaign of brutal warfare, strategic genius, and an iron will. He was the ultimate CEO in a hostile takeover of an entire subcontinent. His new empire needed a new kind of administration, and he implemented sweeping reforms, standardizing everything from writing scripts to laws, as we touched upon earlier. This created a cohesive empire, but also one built on strict adherence and often fear. The Terracotta Army in this context can be seen as a direct extension of this earthly power, a projection of his imperial might into the next world. He wasn't just hoping for a nice afterlife, he was expecting to run the place. Now for a curious, somewhat obsessive detail about the Emperor, his desperate search for the elixir of life. As he grew older, Qin Shi Huang became increasingly fixated on achieving physical immortality. He dispatched expeditions, some led by court sorcerers and alchemists, in search of mythical lands where immortals were said to reside, and where the elixir could be found. One famous story tells of Shu Fu, a court sorcerer who was sent on a massive sea voyage with thousands of young boys and girls to find Penglai Mountain, the mythical land of the immortals, and retrieve the elixir. Shu Fu and his youthful crew never returned. Some legends say they settled in Japan. Can you imagine the pitch? Your Majesty, I need a few thousand kids and several large ships for a trip to a magic island. No guarantees, but the upside is, eternal life. It sounds like the premise for a very strange reality TV show. Billions spent on an army for the afterlife, and equally vast resources poured into trying to avoid needing it in the first place. The man was covering all his bases. This intense desire for immortality also sparks a scholarly debate about the emperor's state of mind in his later years. Some historians suggest his fear of death and his relentless pursuit of eternal life bordered on paranoia, possibly exacerbated by assassination attempts. There were at least 3 notable ones. They point to his increasing seclusion, his elaborate efforts to hide his whereabouts, even having his many palaces connected by secret, walled passageways so he could move unseen, and his reported intolerance of any mention of death. Other scholars argue that while his methods were extreme, his desire for longevity and a well-prepared afterlife were in line with ancient Chinese beliefs and the supreme status he held. They see his actions not as paranoia, but as the logical, albeit grandiose, extension of imperial power and cosmological views of the time. Was he a paranoid tyrant descending into madness, or a supremely confident ruler meticulously planning his eternal reign according to the beliefs of his era? Perhaps a bit of both. The silent, watchful faces of his terracotta soldiers seem to absorb these questions, offering no reply, their purpose fixed, their loyalty absolute, even if their master was, shall we say, a tad demanding. You can almost hear the hushed whispers of the court officials. Is he sending another fleet for the elixir, or is it more clay soldiers this week? I can't keep up. So you have this emperor, Qin Shi Huang, a man who has conquered kingdoms, unified a vast territory, and is now laser-focused on not letting a little thing like death interrupt his reign. His solution? This mind-bogglingly vast mausoleum complex, with the Terracotta Army as its most famous, but by no means only, component. You're looking at an area that's estimated to cover at least 56 square kilometers, or about 22 square miles. To put that in perspective, that's like burying a small city dedicated to one man's afterlife. The central tomb mound itself, which remains unexcavated, is a small mountain, and beneath it, if historical accounts are to be believed, lies a veritable palace. We're talking about a subterranean wonderland, or perhaps a death trap, depending on your perspective and whether you were one of the poor souls tasked with building it. The sheer logistics of constructing the terracotta army within this larger complex are astounding, a true mainstream historical fact that highlights the Qin dynasty's organizational prowess. Imagine the scene: vast pits, dug deep into the earth, arranged with military precision, assembly lines of artisans, as we touched on before, each specializing in a different part of the warrior. A torso here, a leg there, a meticulously crafted head over yonder. These parts weren't just slapped together. The clay, sourced locally, had to be carefully prepared, mixed with sand to control shrinkage and ensure durability when fired. The warriors were constructed in sections, feet and plinth first, then legs, torso, arms, and finally the head. These sections were luted together with clay slip before the whole figure was fired in massive kilns. The kilns themselves would have been a sight, roaring day and night, consuming vast quantities of firewood. Think of the heat, the smoke, the constant activity. It was an industrial operation on an almost unprecedented scale for the ancient world, dedicated entirely to outfitting the emperor for his journey beyond. You almost expect to find an ancient terracotta water cooler where the sculptors gossiped about the latest imperial decree or how an earlobe was just not coming out right that day. After firing, the figures were then painted with vibrant mineral pigments: pinks, reds, blues, greens, and purples, bound with lacquer. Sadly, much of this original bright coloring was lost very quickly upon excavation, as the dry Xi'an air caused the ancient lacquer to curl and flake within minutes of exposure. Archaeologists now have techniques to preserve the remaining color, but for those first few unearthed warriors, their brilliant hues faded like ghosts before the excavator's eyes. This transient beauty adds another layer of poignant history to the figures. Now for a weird, or at least highly specialized, detail that showcases the incredible realism they aimed for. Even the tire treads on the chariots and the shoe soles of the archers were depicted with distinct as varied patterns. This wasn't just about making generic soldiers. It was about creating a convincing, almost living replica of the Qin army. Some archers are shown with one foot slightly forward, bracing themselves, their empty hands clearly once holding bows. The generals are taller, their expressions more commanding, their armor more elaborate. The attention to detail is almost obsessive, suggesting an incredible pride in craftsmanship, or perhaps just a very, very demanding client in the form of the emperor. One can imagine a supervisor squinting at a newly made boot sole and saying, "No, no, the grip pattern on last week's batch was far more intimidating. Do it again." It's this level of detail that truly breathes life into these clay figures, making them feel less like statues and more like individuals frozen in time. The intense focus on realism and the sheer number of unique faces have led to a fascinating scholarly debate. Were the faces of the terracotta warriors actual portraits of individual soldiers in Qin Shi Huang's army, or were they more generalized types, created from a repertoire of common features. Some researchers, using advanced facial recognition software, have argued that the variations are so distinct that they must represent real people. They point to the unique combination of ear shapes, noses, mustaches, and expressions as evidence of individualized portraiture. Imagine being a soldier in the Qin army and being told to sit for your terracotta portrait, knowing it would guard the emperor for eternity. Try to look fierce, Jang. The emperor wants an intimidating afterlife entourage. Other scholars are more cautious, suggesting that while the artisans clearly aimed for individuality, they were likely working from a set of templates or idealized features, combining them in countless ways to create the illusion of unique individuals. They argue that true portraiture for 8,000 soldiers would have been logistically impossible. The debate continues, but whether they are true portraits or masterful composites, the effect is the same, a hauntingly lifelike legion. Each face you look at seems to hold its own story, its own unspoken history, adding to the profound mystery of the sight. As you pull your gaze away from the individual faces of the soldiers, trying to comprehend the sheer multitude, you begin to realize that this army, as vast as it is just one neighborhood in Qin Shi Huang's meticulously planned eternal city. The pits containing the warriors are located to the east of the main tomb mound, strategically placed like an advance guard, protecting the emperor from threats arriving from the conquered eastern states. But the necropolis, as a whole, is a microcosm of his empire, designed to provide him with everything he would need or desire in the afterlife. It's not just about defense, it's about eternal rule in a familiar, if subterranean, setting. Imagine the project meetings for this. Okay, we've got the army sorted. What about celestial bodies and entertainment? The emperor can't be bored for eternity. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this empire in miniature concept is the discovery of other non-military pits within the mausoleum complex. Archaeologists have unearthed pits containing terracotta officials and scribes ready to continue the administration of the afterlife empire. There are even pits with terracotta acrobats, strongmen, and musicians, presumably to provide eternal entertainment for the emperor. Can you picture it? A clay strongman forever frozen mid-lift, an acrobat in a perpetual backflip. It's like an eternal Cirque du Soleil, but with a much more permanent cast. These discoveries demonstrate that Qin Shi Huang wasn't just planning for war in the afterlife. He was planning for a fully functioning imperial court, complete with bureaucracy and leisure activities. It's a level of detailed afterlife planning that makes packing for a week-long vacation seem like a casual afterthought. Beyond the human figures, the complex also included stables with life-sized bronze and terracotta horses, some with chariots, and even remarkably detailed bronze waterfowl, swans, cranes, and ducks set within a simulated underground river landscape, believed to represent the imperial gardens. The craftsmanship of these bronze birds is exquisite, showcasing the advanced bronze casting techniques of the Qin dynasty. This wasn't just about roughing it in the afterlife. It was about recreating the opulence and comforts of the imperial palace. And one almost expects to find a terracotta chef with a tiny, perfectly sculpted clay noodle. Now for a weird detail that hints at the incredible, almost fanatical attention to detail and symbolism. Within some of these auxiliary pits, archaeologists found evidence of real grain and animal remains, not just statues of provisions, but actual once edible offerings. In the stable pits, alongside the model horses, they found piles of hay. It's as if they were trying to blur the lines between the symbolic and the actual, ensuring the emperor's afterlife wasn't just a replica, but a magically sustained reality. It makes you wonder about the poor soul whose job it was to ensure the afterlife hay was properly stacked. Make sure it's the good stuff. The emperor's spectral horses are famously picky. This dedication to providing for every conceivable need, both practical and symbolic, is what elevates the mausoleum from a mere tomb to a genuine attempt at creating a parallel universe. This extensive provisioning for the afterlife leads to a scholarly debate concerning the religious or cosmological beliefs that underpinned such an elaborate construction. What exactly did Qin Shi Huang and his advisors believe happened after death? And how did they think these terracotta figures and model environments would function? Some scholars argue that the tomb complex was a literal spirit trap or a soul vessel designed to house the emperor's various spiritual essences and provide them with a familiar and controllable environment. In this view, the terracotta figures were animated by ritual, becoming actual servants and protectors in the spiritual realm. Others suggest a more symbolic interpretation, where the mausoleum and its contents served as a powerful cosmic statement, aligning the emperor with the forces of the universe and ensuring the continuity of his imperial power through ancestral veneration and the proper ordering of the cosmos even after his physical demise. Was it a practical attempt to live on, or a symbolic gesture to secure a legacy? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex tapestry of magical thinking, ancestor worship, and raw imperial ambition. The sheer effort involved suggests they weren't taking any chances. You can almost feel the weight of those ancient beliefs pressing down from the tons of earth above, a testament to humanity's enduring desire to understand and perhaps even control what lies beyond the veil of life. The silence of the figures is profound, but the intent behind them screams of a desperate, monumental hope. We've talked about the emperor, his ambitions, and the incredible artistry of his posthumous retinue. But now, let your thoughts drift to the hands that actually built all of this. The tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, of laborers, artisans, and convicts whose sweat and toil raised this underground kingdom. You're not just looking at clay and bronze, you're looking at a monumental testament to human endeavor and likely human suffering. The ground beneath your feet, as you imagine yourself walking these excavated corridors, is saturated with their efforts. The air, if it could carry scents from the past, might hold the faintest trace of their perspiration, the dust from their chisels, the smoke from their fires. When one mainstream historical fact is that the workforce for these grand imperial projects, including the mausoleum and sections of the Great Wall, was largely composed of conscripted laborers and convicts. Historical records, like those of Sima Qian, mention vast numbers of people being moved to the capital area to work on these undertakings. Some were skilled artisans, commandeered for their talents. Others were simply peasants, taken from their fields, or prisoners, paying for their crimes with backbreaking labor. Imagine the sheer organizational challenge: housing, feeding, and managing a workforce the size of a large city, all dedicated to these colossal constructions. The scale of mobilization was unprecedented. It's like trying to organize the biggest music festival ever, but instead of setting up stages, you're building an eternal home for an emperor, and the headliner is famously demanding. These workers toiled under immense pressure. We've already mentioned the inscribed names on the terracotta figures for quality control, hinting at the strict oversight. The working conditions were likely harsh, the hours long, and the punishments for errors or insubordination severe. While the artisans who crafted the beautiful bronze waterfowl or the expressive faces of the warriors were undoubtedly highly valued, the bulk of the manual labor, digging the vast pits, hauling tons of earth, firing the kilns, would have fallen to those less skilled or less fortunate. It's a sobering thought that this wonder of the ancient world, which brings us so much awe today, was built on a foundation of such arduous and often forced labor. There are no statues to these workers, no grand inscriptions detailing their individual contributions, only the silent, massive result of their collective effort. Now for a weird and rather poignant detail that has emerged from archaeological work around the broader mausoleum site: the discovery of actual worker cemeteries. These are not elaborate tombs, but simple burial grounds for some of the laborers who died during the construction. Analysis of their remains often shows evidence of hard labor, malnutrition, and injury. It's a stark reminder of the human cost. While the emperor planned his luxurious afterlife, many of those who built it found only a simple grave in the shadow of his grand design. It puts a different spin on the phrase, dying for your art, or in this case, for your emperor's art. One can only hope they got some form of afterlife workers' compensation, perhaps a slightly less crowded section of the underworld. This human element fuels a persistent scholarly debate. How should we view such monumental achievements that are inextricably linked to autocratic rule and immense human cost? Do the artistic and historical significance of sites like the Terracotta Army and the Great Wall transcend the oppressive methods used to create them? Or should our admiration always be tempered by a keen awareness of the suffering involved? Some argue that we must judge these achievements within their historical context, where imperial power and mass conscription were common, and that the enduring legacy and knowledge gained are paramount. Others contend that we must never lose sight of the ethical implications, and that these monuments also stand as memorials to exploited labor. There's no easy answer, of course. As you gaze upon the impassive faces of the terracotta warriors, you might find yourself pondering this very question. They stand as symbols of imperial power, artistic genius, and also, perhaps, of countless forgotten lives poured into their creation. The drive for order and control that Qin Shi Huang demonstrated in life is mirrored perfectly in the layout of his tomb complex. Every soldier in its place, every official ready at their post, every bronze bird perfectly positioned. This desire for standardization wasn't just for show, it was a fundamental aspect of his rule. He didn't just standardize currency and axle widths, he standardized thought to a certain extent, with the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars, an attempt to eliminate dissenting philosophies and consolidate his own legalist ideology. It was an era of incredible innovation and unification, but also of intellectual suppression and brutal enforcement. The Terracotta Army, so uniform in its purpose and ranks, yet so individual in its features, is almost a metaphor for the Qin state itself, a vast unified body composed of countless individuals, all subservient to the singular will of the emperor. You feel the immense weight of that control, that ambition, radiating from the very earth, a silent echo of a man who tried to sculpt not just an army of clay, but an entire world, both living and spectral, to his design. You're standing on the precipice of change. The monumental efforts to secure Qin Shi Huang's eternal reign are, in earthly terms at least, drawing to a close. The emperor, despite his frantic search for the elixir of life, despite his armies both living and clay, is mortal. He died in 210 BC, ironically, while on a tour of eastern China, still searching for that elusive key to immortality. His death, like his life, was shrouded in secrecy and intrigue. His chief eunuch, Zhao Gao, and the chancellor, Li Si, fearing chaos and wanting to install their preferred successor, concealed his death for some time. Imagine that journey back to the capital, the emperor's entourage proceeding as if nothing was wrong, while behind the drawn curtains of the imperial chariot, the great unifier lay deceased. They even reportedly loaded carts of salted fish to travel with the emperor's chariot to mask the smell of decomposition. Talk about a fragrant cover-up. It's a grimly comedic image, a far cry from the dignified eternal reign he envisioned. The death of Qin Shi Huang was the beginning of the end for his dynasty. One mainstream historical fact is the incredibly short lifespan of the Qin dynasty itself. After unifying China in 221 BC, it lasted only until 206 BC, a mere 15 years. 15 years of centralized rule after centuries of division, and then, almost as quickly as it was forged, it shattered. The emperor's iron grip had held the vast empire together, but his successor, his younger son Hu Hai, installed through the machinations of Zhao Gao and Li Si, lacked his father's strength and vision. Widespread rebellions, fueled by the harsh laws, heavy taxation, and the immense burden of conscripted labor for projects like the Mausoleum and the Great Wall, erupted across the empire. The very projects designed to cement the emperor's glory contributed to his dynasty's swift demise. It's a classic case of overreach. Building an 8,000-strong pottery security detail for your tomb is impressive, but if your living subjects are sharpening pitchforks, your priorities might need a reshuffle. So what happened to this magnificent terracotta army, this silent legion, as the Qin dynasty crumbled? Historical accounts, again by Sima Qian, suggest that the mausoleum complex, including the pits housing the warriors, was looted and burned by rebels shortly after the emperor's death. The most prominent figure associated with this destruction is Xiang Yu, a powerful rebel leader who vied for supremacy after the Qin collapse. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. As you wander through the excavated pits today, or imagine yourself doing so, you can see the telltale signs, remnants of charred wooden roof beams that once covered the pits, and areas where the orderly ranks of soldiers were clearly disturbed, their clay bodies broken, their weapons stolen. Imagine the scene, the fires raging, the wooden ceilings collapsing, crushing the soldiers beneath, plunging them into darkness and disarray. After all that meticulous planning, all that artistic effort, their first real battle was against the chaos of a falling dynasty, and it was one they couldn't win. This leads to a somewhat weird detail. Despite the apparent looting and destruction, many of the bronze weapons originally held by the warriors were remarkably well preserved, as we've noted, thanks to that chromium plating. However, it seems the looters knew what they were after. Most of the actual functional weapons, swords, spears, crossbows, are missing from the pits, presumably taken by Xiang Yu's forces or other rebels to arm their own troops. What remained were mostly the less practical, perhaps more symbolic items, or those too damaged or difficult to retrieve quickly. It's ironic, isn't it? Weapons forged to serve an emperor in the afterlife were instead recycled to fight in the very real wars that followed his death. It's the ultimate form of afterlife disarmament. One can almost picture a rebel soldier, previously a conscript laborer, picking up a Qin crossbow from a shattered terracotta warrior and thinking, well, 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 look what we have here. About time these things saw some real action. The period of destruction and the subsequent centuries of neglect raise a scholarly debate. How much of the terracotta army and the broader mausoleum complex was actually completed according to Qin Shi Huang's original, undoubtedly even grander plans? We know the emperor died while the project was still underway. Was the army we see today the final version, or a scaled back or hastily finished portion? Some scholars believe that certain pits show signs of being incomplete, or that the overall layout suggests further, yet undiscovered elements. The sheer size of the unexcavated tomb mound and the surrounding areas hints that what has been revealed so far, as breathtaking as it is, might only be a fraction of the total design. The descriptions by Sima Qian of the central tomb, with its rivers of mercury and celestial maps, suggest a level of opulence and complexity far beyond what has been unearthed in the warrior pits. Did the collapse of the dynasty halt construction prematurely, leaving vast sections unfinished or undocumented? Or did the initial phase of looting and burning obscure the true extent of what was once there? The earth holds these secrets tightly, and each new excavation, however small, offers tantalizing clues but rarely complete answers. The silent army, even in its partially disturbed state, stands as a testament to a vision so large it perhaps outstripped even the emperor's formidable resources and lifespan. So the Qin dynasty collapses, a brief, brilliant, brutal flash in the long scroll of Chinese history. Xiang Yu's forces, and perhaps others, have rampaged through the terracotta ranks, taking what they can, leaving behind a scene of subterranean chaos. The fires die down. The wooden roofs, now mostly ash and charred beams, collapse further, burying the broken soldiers and their remaining accoutrements under tons of earth and debris. And then silence, a profound, enduring silence that will last for over 2,000 years. You are now witnessing the long sleep of the terracotta army. Imagine the slow, relentless work of nature. Seasons turn overhead. Dynasties rise and fall. The Han, the Tang, the Song, the Ming, the Qing. Generations live and die on the farmland above, completely unaware of the silent imperial guard waiting just a few meters beneath their feet. Rainwater seeps into the soil, carrying with it minerals that will further encase the figures. Roots of plants may probe the disturbed earth, sometimes finding their way into the cracks of a warrior's armor. Small burrowing animals might create new tunnels, oblivious to the sculpted faces they pass. The memory of this specific location, this precise configuration of pits, fades from common knowledge. while the massive tomb mound of Qin Shi Huang himself remains a prominent landmark, a constant looming presence in the landscape. The exact whereabouts and nature of his subterranean army are largely forgotten, relegated to the realm of legend or obscure historical texts. It's a mainstream historical fact that while Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian describe the emperor's tomb in some detail, the specific existence of this vast terracotta force wasn't widely known or understood until its accidental rediscovery. It's like the world's biggest, most elaborate secret, kept not by locks and keys, but by layers of earth and the passage of centuries. Occasionally, farmers tilling the land might unearth a fragment of pottery, a piece of an ancient weapon, or an unusually shaped terracotta head, dismissing it as an old relic, perhaps a bit spooky, but not connecting it to the true scale of what lay beneath. These were just whispers from the deep, hints of the silent vigil being kept below. Then, as we saw at the very beginning of our journey tonight, comes that fateful day in March 1974. The drought, the well-digging farmers, the thud of a shovel against something hard. You're back with young Jifa and his companions. That moment of stunned realization as a pottery head emerges from the dry earth. The rediscovery of the terracotta army sent shockwaves through the archaeological world and captured the global imagination unlike almost any other find in the 20th century. It was as if a lost chapter of human history had been thrust back into the light. Suddenly, this almost mythical emperor, Qin Shi Huang, known from texts but still somewhat remote, became vividly, tangibly real. Here was his army ready for inspection. News crews flocked to the site. Archaeologists, historians, and tourists soon followed. The silent, forgotten field in Lintong County was transformed into one of the most famous archaeological sites on Earth. It's hard to overstate the impact. It was like finding Atlantis, but with more soldiers and slightly less underwater. One slightly weird, or perhaps just endearingly human, detail from the early days of the modern excavation concerns the initial attempts to piece together the shattered warriors. Remember, many of them were found in thousands of fragments due to the collapse of the pit roofs and the earlier disturbances. Archaeologists and conservationists faced a colossal three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes they'd spend weeks, even months, painstakingly trying to match pieces, only to find that a particular hand definitely didn't belong to that specific arm, or that a stern-looking mustache fragment simply wouldn't fit on a more youthful face. It required incredible patience, skill, and probably a lot of tea. You can imagine the quiet satisfaction, though, when two pieces finally click together, bringing a small part of a 2,200-year-old soldier back into coherent form. It was a slow, meticulous resurrection, piece by fragile piece. The rediscovery and subsequent excavation also ignited a scholarly debate that continues to this day. What is the best way to preserve and present such a monumental and fragile site? Once exposed to air and changes in humidity, the delicate paintwork on the warriors, as we noted, began to flake and fade almost immediately. The sheer number of artifacts presents an enormous conservation challenge. Should all the pits be fully excavated, potentially risking further degradation to currently buried figures, or should some sections be left untouched for future generations with potentially more advanced conservation techniques? There's a constant tension between the desire for research and public display and the imperative of long-term preservation. Some argue for rapid, extensive excavation to understand the full scope of the site before natural or accidental damage can occur underground. Others advocate for a much slower, more cautious approach, focusing on preserving what is already exposed and only excavating when new, non-invasive conservation methods are perfected. It's a debate with no easy answers, balancing the excitement of discovery with the profound responsibility of safeguarding such a unique piece of human heritage for millennia to come. The silent warriors, having waited over 2,000 years, seem to embody a kind of patient endurance that perhaps we, their modern observers, could learn from. The work at the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor is far from over. You are, in essence, witnessing a live, ongoing archaeological investigation that will likely span many more decades, if not centuries. What has been uncovered so far, the thousands of warriors, the acrobats, the officials, the bronze chariots and waterfowl, is believed to be just a fraction of the entire complex. The great tomb mound of Qin Shi Huang himself, that man-made mountain near the warrior pits, remains intentionally unexcavated. This is a mainstream historical fact that fuels endless speculation and anticipation. Chinese archaeologists are, quite rightly, approaching it with extreme caution, citing concerns about preserving whatever treasures and dangers may lie within. Sima Qian's descriptions of a subterranean palace, complete with those rivers of flowing mercury, celestial ceilings, and deadly booby traps, are tantalizing and a little terrifying. Imagine being the first to try and bypass a 2,200-year-old anti-burglar system designed by an emperor who really didn't want to be disturbed. No one's rushing to volunteer for that. Modern research techniques, such as remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, and magnetic anomaly surveys, have indicated that there are indeed unusual subterranean structures and high concentrations of mercury within the unopened tomb mound, lending credence to Sima Qian's ancient accounts. It's like having a treasure map where X marks the spot, but X is also surrounded by signs that say, seriously, danger, and proceed with extreme caution, preferably with a robot. The decision to leave the central tomb sealed for now is a testament to a responsible archaeological approach, prioritizing preservation until methods are developed that can ensure the safety of both the excavators and the priceless historical artifacts within. A slightly quirky, or perhaps just deeply dedicated detail about the ongoing work is the Terracotta Army Hospital. Not for the soldiers, of course, they're a bit past needing medical attention, but a dedicated on-site facility and team of conservators whose sole job is the preservation and restoration of the excavated figures and artifacts. They are the doctors of antiquity, painstakingly cleaning, consolidating, and reassembling these fragile clay guardians. Each warrior presents unique challenges, from stabilizing flaking paint to repairing ancient breaks. It's slow, meticulous work, a constant battle against the decay of time and the elements. It's a far cry from the mass production workshops that first created them, now replaced by careful, almost reverent individual attention. One imagines a conservator gently brushing dust from a terracotta cheek, murmuring, "Don't worry, old chap, we'll have you looking battle-ready again in no time." The legacy of the Terracotta Army is immense and multifaceted. It has rewritten our understanding of the Qin dynasty, providing unparalleled insights into their military organization, technological prowess, artistic achievements, and the immense power wielded by the first emperor. It has become a global icon, a symbol of China's ancient heritage, drawing millions of visitors and inspiring countless works of art, literature, and film. This brings us to a final scholarly debate, or perhaps more of a philosophical reflection. In his obsessive quest for physical immortality, Qin Shi Huang ultimately failed. Yet through the creation of his terracotta army and his monumental tomb, has he achieved a different kind of immortality, an immortality of legacy? His name, his achievements, and the sheer audacity of his vision are now known worldwide, discussed and marveled at more than 2 millennia after his death. He didn't get to live forever, but his story, embodied in these silent clay figures, certainly has. Is this the ultimate irony, or perhaps the ultimate triumph? The man who feared being forgotten is now unforgettable, not because of an elixir, but because of the earth and clay he commanded. As you let your mind absorb the sheer scale of this 2,000-year vigil, the fall of a dynasty, the centuries of silence, and the astonished faces of those who brought it back to light, you feel a profound connection to a distant past made tangible. These warriors, each unique, each a silent witness, continue to stand guard, their vigil now kept not just for an emperor, but for history itself. Now let the images of these steadfast soldiers begin to soften in your mind. The sharp edges of their armor, the defined expressions on their faces, the vastness of their underground ranks. Let it all begin to gently blur. The torchlight of discovery, the echoing sounds of the pits, the murmurs of history, all begin to fade into a comfortable, encompassing quiet. The immense weight of those 2 millennia, the silent waiting, the sudden reawakening, can now settle into a peaceful stillness. The earth that held them, the patient artisans who formed them, the emperor who willed them into existence, all these elements are part of a vast, unfolding story, and you've journeyed through its core. There's no need to hold on to the details now, no need to analyze or question. Simply allow the feeling of wonder, the sense of deep time, to wash over you like a gentle tide. The ranks of warriors, so vivid moments ago, are now receding into the soft darkness of history, their duty done for tonight's tale. The hum of the ancient world, the whispers of forgotten craftsmen, the silent commands of a long-gone emperor, all are quieting down, becoming part of the gentle background hum. Feel any tension in your shoulders, your jaw, your mind. Just release with each slow breath. You are safe, you are comfortable, and the story has reached its gentle end. The silent vigil of the terracotta army continues, but your own vigil of wakefulness can now give way to rest. Good night.